saying how the seas should be open and free, except for countries that the U.S. says cannot have open, free access to the seas. But going back to the U.S. and China, and as you were saying, blockades. One of the ways China was trying to kind of diversify the pathways, the routes that its goods and people would travel through was through Myanmar, pipelines, a port in southwest Myanmar. And now Myanmar is being completely destabilized. And this has been something ongoing for many years. I've covered it for many years, how the US has been in there with their funded opposition groups, blocking Chinese projects, sabotaging them, attacking them. And now we have this huge political crisis unfolding since February, since the military ousted Aung San Suu Kyi. You and I have talked about in previous episodes about just how it wasn't even a client regime. It was a mask. It was a mask with people from Myanmar, and ultimately there were literally foreigners running Myanmar policy under the government of Aung San Suu Kyi, Australian and British citizens, U.S. aid, George Soros's Open Society, practically running the country. And this is why the military had to take over. Today we are going to talk about just what's happening in Myanmar. And I predicted it as soon as it happened because I was watching the violent protests here in Thailand. I remember in 2011, the Arab Spring, how that was from the very beginning, obviously US engineered. And the violence, the Western media tried to cover up until it was a war. It was a war with tanks and missiles and machine guns. And then they finally admitted that, oh yeah, maybe the opposition is armed. And the exact same thing happened in Myanmar. Now it is out of control. Let's go over these headlines and we'll see just how the Western media is still trying to spin it, even with open admissions from the opposition that they're the ones behind this. This terrorism is now terrorism. So this is from Voice of America, U.S. State Department media. Myanmar hit by more than 300 bombing attacks since February 1st coup. And it says down here, in the 4 months since February 1st military takeover, cities across Myanmar have been rocked by more than 300 bomb blasts. And the ruling junta and its opponents are trading blame over the explosions and the rising death toll, sources in the country say. The trading of blame it's not even true, because the opposition openly admits that they're doing this. And I'm going to show another US-funded source admitting this. But if we go through here, they're talking about how it's schools. So this is number 6 high school in northwestern Sangang region. And here, here's an anonymous source telling Radio Free Asia, another US State Department media platform, he thought the police stations in the school were behind the attack. The police are stationed in the school in the first place to get them open and get students going there. So why would the police be bombing the school that it's their job to open and get students into? Crazy. It's just completely crazy. Angelo, yes.
Who would believe that? I mean, who would believe that the military are putting bombs? Why would you put bombs on the first place? I mean, again, and the wording used. I mean, if it was a single bomb in Israel put by Palestinians, it would be terrorism. Here you have 300 bombs over a short period since February, and they're not calling this terrorism. Again, exactly. To who? What would be the purpose of doing something like this from the military? You know, it's just ridiculous. But it's good. You know, I think it's good. I think if people have a minimum of brain here, they would see that it's just obvious. It's just obvious. There's one side, and I think this is the, you know, there are several stages when you're mounting towards a civil war. Here is that it's frightening the population, and they want people to take side too. This is the stage where they want to say, okay, they want to politicize people. Keep in mind that 90% of people usually in any society is not politicized, is not radical. You know, there's a minority which is radical, which is very politicized. And here what they're trying to do is that they want to tell people, okay, which side are you? If you are not with us, you are against us. And that's the same I experienced in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, they forced shops, You know, they started to go to the shops and saying, oh, are you yellow or are you blue side? And this is how you further politicize and you create the divide. Now it's about dividing people and creating fear. You know, and there's a boycott. They don't want kids to go to school, and they want to show, maybe to try to show this way that, oh, you see, there's maybe 50% of kids that are not going to school, meaning that 50% of the population is supporting this movement. It's not true. Right now, there's 75% of kids that are going to school, but again, you know, 25% are not going to school because of fear, because of terrorism. And this is what they call the peaceful. They've been calling this a peaceful opposition. It's not. Those are terrorists.
Absolutely. And just like you were saying, your experience in Hong Kong, my experience here in Thailand, the various US-backed protests over the years, and including the most recent one, that's what they did. They went out, and if you weren't on their side, even if you were trying to remain completely uninvolved in politics, they would threaten you. They would harass you. And this is exactly what they said they were going to do in Myanmar. And I'm going to show that. So here you have, let's go back to here. Here they say both sides suspected. No, they're not. No, they're not. This is just Voice of America, a US State Department propaganda, trying to sow seeds of doubt regarding the violence and terrorism being carried out by an opposition movement the US government has built up over decades now, and is funding and wants back in power right now. And they did the exact same thing with Libya and Syria. That literally Al-Qaeda and ISIS running around murdering people, and they were trying to pass them off as peaceful pro-democracy protesters that were the victims of dictatorships. Not true. So here's another article. This is from Myanmar Now. And I've pointed out many times in the past, Myanmar Now is funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, the US government's funding arm for opposition all around the world. As spats of killings continues, anti-junta forces warn of more to come. So right in the headline, the opposition, the anti-junta forces say there's going to be more killings. So this was them going around murdering any politician that was not on their side. They're assembling death squads and hunting these people down. Elements within the anti-coup movement are increasingly turning to guerrilla tactics to resist the junta's repression. So this is how they're justifying straight up terrorism. And if we come down here, one of the most recent, and they're talking about these attacks, came on Tuesday afternoon when a lone gunman shot at two soldiers stationed outside the number 32 basic education high school. And this was in Mandalay, killing one and injuring the other. And these are not homemade weapons like the Western media keeps saying. These are real war weapons that are killing people. Unlike many such incidents, because the opposition doesn't always take credit for it, even though they say that they're going to do it, this one could be attributed to a particular group, the Mandalay People's Defense Force. So this is the so-called pro-democracy peaceful protesters. They've already reorganized themselves as People Defense Forces, armed groups, death squads, basically. And this one admitted that they attacked this school. And they said this is part of a nationwide network of local civilian resistance forces that aims to coalesce into a federal army. So this is affiliated directly with that national unity government that we've also talked about. Right here, our PDF team has started carrying out guerrilla activities in Mandalay. One of the group's leaders said he also claims responsibility for a recent series of small explosions in 5 townships. So this is them admitting that it's them setting off all of these bombs that Voice of America is trying to pretend it's a huge mystery who's doing it. And he insisted, we don't want people to go into crowded places such as the electricity office or the courts. So pretty much any public building associated with the government. If you go there, they're saying you're going to be a target because we're going to shoot at them, we're going to blow them up. And if you're there and you die, it's your own fault because we're warning you. So this is what they've been doing on social media. And if people don't believe me, go on social media, follow some of them. You will be shocked how open they are about admitting all of this. And Angela, you were talking about the schools. Reuters boycott and bombings mar Myanmar's new school year. Bombings, again, just like you said, this is terrorism. Terrorism mars Myanmar's new school year, not like bombings, like it's a heavy rain or something, bad weather. It's bombs, it's terrorism. And they talk about here, they said no more than a quarter of Myanmar's more than 12 million pupils enrolled for the new school year amid a protest boycott against military rule and in the wake of a series of bombings. Now, I think some of these people are boycotting the school because they're part of the protest, but I think many more of them are not going to school because they're afraid of dying because the schools are being shot at and blown up. And the opposition is clearly behind this. They admitted that they're behind this. And there's one other thing I want to show people. Right down here, it said 125,000 teachers, which sounds like a lot. They were part of the boycott, but that's out of 430,000. So that's not even half. So it's a civil disobedience movement. There are a lot of people joining it, but it's not even half. It's a minority. And so when you have a minority, go ahead, Angela.
I just want to add, there's a huge meddling into the unions. We saw this also in Hong Kong. So those teachers' unions are very easy to be corrupted. So what they've been doing for a long time was to pour huge amount of money into those teachers' unions. And so those unions are in the hands of the US. I just want to add one more thing is that they are doing random execution of village leaders. So if they're asking those village leaders to take side and to pledge allegiance to the anti-coup movement. So it's a mafia style. If you're not with us, we are going to kill you. And keep in mind, those village leaders, they've been democratically elected, and they have a responsibility just to protect the village and to make sure that it's business as usual, even though, at the national level, there can be problem, but at the village level, how can you politicize all the way to the village level and kill them? They just, they are acting like mafia style killing. You're not with us, well, we kill you. And the amount, it's huge. We're talking about tens of villages that are being killed. It's very scary. It's very scary, and it's getting more and more extreme. And I think we can call it now a civil war. We were expecting a civil war. We already saw a couple of months ago the direction it was going, but now Myanmar is at civil war.
Absolutely. And what you were saying about the unions being infiltrated by U.S. Government agencies, this is not just us imagining this. Carl Gershman, the head of the National Endowment for Democracy, in that video conference that got leaked, he admitted that they control the unions in Belarus. And everywhere else, that's one of their strategies, is infiltrating the unions. And the point I wanted to make, though, was that despite that, not even half joined the civil disobedience movement. So we have one article here where they're admitting that that's what they're doing. They're carrying out attacks on schools, and they're telling the people, don't go to school, don't go to any government building, don't pay your bills. We're trying to collapse this government. And if you do anything at any public building, you're probably going to die. And then we have the motive here. Not even half are joining their civil disobedience movement. Only a minority is joining it. So in order to stop people from participating in society, they're using terrorism. And just like you said, Myanmar now, a US government-funded media organization spewing propaganda, even they, every single day, are reporting on these village leaders being executed by the opposition. And just like you said, you don't agree with somebody's politics. This all started out with them claiming, oh, the army is brutalizing us. They're killing us, so we have to get arms and fight back. But this isn't them fighting back against armed aggression. This is them hunting people down and murdering them. Politicians who are not threatening them physically. And this is why the military has been using force against these protesters, because the opposition was violent from the very beginning. And when I told people that these same supporters of Aung San Suu Kyi were the ones going into the Rohingya communities, chopping people up and burning their homes and their businesses down. People were skeptical, but now look with your own eyes what the opposition media itself is admitting. They are carrying out terrorism, not just against government buildings, but against schools. Let's see if it's it's in this one, the Reuters article. Teachers uniform. Go ahead, Angelo.
Yes, maybe expect those figures that come from Myanmar now or all US-backed media to be inflated. They call it. They talk about 125,000. It's probably less.
Yes.
They talk about now the figure of people being killed. They talk about 800-900. The official figure is around between 200 to 300. There's always inflated numbers. It's always in their favor.
Yes, and even their inflated numbers still shows us that it's not even half of the population getting involved with their civil disobedience movement. This part right here says a lot. First of all, it said security forces stood guard at some schools and brought pupils under armed escort from their homes. So these students that want to study, they're afraid for their lives. They need armed escorts to get to school. And here it says, teachers were also afraid. Some teachers go to school in normal clothing and change into their uniforms only inside the school. Now, why would they have to do that if the opposition wasn't targeting teachers who are, because some people might not know this, but in some Southeast Asian countries, teachers wear uniforms to go teach at public schools. And so it's very easy to identify them. And if you have an opposition trying to shut down the schools, they're going to be able to target a teacher very easily, unless they do this. So this is the climate of fear and terrorism this US-backed opposition has created in Myanmar. And we still have not heard, actually, let's go to this. The Irrawaddy, also funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. So I'm not, people say I'm working for the junta in Myanmar. All of those sources that I use are from the opposition, the US government-funded opposition, and even they have to admit this because there's no way for them to cover this up. Myanmar school attacks, unacceptable, says UNICEF. And again, they're going to sit here and say, there's a blame game going on where they're trading blame. But I just showed everyone from Myanmar now that the opposition admits that it's them doing this, and they have the motive to do it. It's very obviously them doing it. Myanmar's government wants to show that they can keep running the country. They have the soldiers and police at the schools in the first place to get them open and get people back to normal. And to stop it from going back to normal, the opposition is using terrorism. And so here is UNICEF condemning it. What about Human Rights Watch? What about Amnesty International? If you go to their websites for Myanmar, you're going to notice that there's literally nothing at all about the school bombings. And Angelo, you pointed this out to me. As a matter of fact, you're the one that caught this news story. And this was 1 or 2 weeks ago when you told me this. And we saw US State Department funded media platforms saying that this has been going on since February, and it's been hundreds of bombings. So how is Amnesty Now, or Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, how are they not picking up on this? Why are they not talking about this? Especially if there was any evidence at all that Myanmar's military was doing this to frame the opposition, wouldn't they have said something? And the fact of the matter is, and we've seen this so many times before in Hong Kong, here in Thailand, and in Syria, and in Libya, we watch these fake, and they are absolutely fake human rights groups covering up atrocities carried out by the US-backed proxies and making things up about the governments that are trying to be overthrown. And this is the role that they serve, controlling information and smoothing over things like this, or just not mentioning them at all. Angela, what do you think about that? Are you surprised that Human Rights Watch and
No, I'm not surprised. It's always about the funding, where whenever you look at the money, follow the money, who's funding them. The main contributors of Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International is the US, and they need to follow somehow the U.S. State Department objective. There are a few cases where they are actually working for human rights. In the case of Palestinians, but because the story is so big and it's becoming mainstream now. It's a good thing, of course, for Palestinians, but keep in mind they need somehow, in some cases, to be for human rights, and it's legitimate. But when it comes to NATO agenda, then it's all completely fake. I want you to just say one thing. You mentioned before, we have a hard time finding English-speaking media on Myanmar that is telling the other story. Everything, all the medias in English are all US-backed, US-funded, and the very few that are on Myanmar that are telling you a more balanced story, or the other side story, are being banned on social media. So we have to, you and I, we have to work very hard to find the information on Global Light on Myanmar and so on, and then we can have a more accurate view on what is happening on Myanmar. And it's a hard work. And this is one of the reasons we are stepping in, because there's so much misinformation, and we've been calling all along. It's been 2 months. We've been working really hard on this. We've been calling along, what was their motives and where they're heading. And so far, the US failed to put the puppet regime in place, and they're going for the next solution. What is the next solution? Is to just create chaos. You create chaos. They don't care about Myanmar. When you create Myanmar was already in a civil war. It's been very split with the ethnic armed groups. So it's not very united country. Now it's going to be very easy. Just, you divide and conquer. It's a chaos. It doesn't matter. It's not going to affect the US, but it's going to affect China indirectly. And all the region is going to be affected. They are going to have refugees. You already have a lot of refugees in Thailand, in China. People don't know it, but there are hundreds of thousands of Burmese who have fled into southern Yunnan province. And the whole region is going to suffer.
Absolutely, and again, that's what this is all about. Well, there's a couple of things here. ASEAN, this organization of Southeast Asian nations, they are still being pressured to back this opposition and to shun, to boycott, to sanction. As a matter of fact, the only thing that you will see here on Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch is the need for more sanctions on Myanmar to keep pressuring the government that's in power, and no mention at all of the terrorism and the compromised nature of the opposition. So this is still going on, but then you have to ask yourself, who in Southeast Asia right now is going to want to back an opposition blowing up schools? I mean, what are they going to do when they get into power? And when Aung San Suu Kyi was in power, this was the big reveal, was that no, she's not pro-democracy. No, she doesn't care about human rights. She's part of this extremely racist, genocidal, selfish. It's just the product of British imperialism. This is what they turned the people in Myanmar into, and she was the embodiment of that. And her National League for Democracy were the embodiment of that. Plus, they were also selling the country out at the same time. And just like you said, they're going to create refugees. They're going to go into Thailand. They're going to go into China. That is the whole goal. They're trying to undermine and destabilize Thailand. And so sending refugees into Thailand only helps that goal. The U.S. goal is to destabilize all of Southeast Asia, to either coerce the region into cutting ties with China or to destabilize it so badly that the ties are irrelevant. They don't help China in its continued rise, economically in the region and around the globe. That's what all of this is about, and that goes back to the first story we covered today, where the U.S. is reconfiguring its entire military specifically to surround China and to antagonize China, and the threat, just like you said, of blockade. So That's what they're doing in Myanmar. They're trying to wreck the entire country, ruin all of these projects China was working on for infrastructure, would have helped unite the people there and move the country forward. This is what the U.S. This is what U.S. foreign policy is really aimed at: chaos. And we could see that. Just look at from North Africa all the way to Central Asia and everything in between, completely destroyed or languishing under sanctions because of the U.S. Angelo?
I want to add up something which is related to democracy, the whole concept of democracy and what democracy can lead to. So basically, democracy, you can have some cases where you have 51% of people that are ruling over 49% of people. So it's what we call the mob rule. And you see there are lots of distortion because of that. Distortion like the example of Myanmar, you can have a minority of Burmese ethnic against, I would say Buddhists against Muslims. So you see, you have the minority which will never be represented. You have in Israel, Arab, Israeli, they will be never represented because the vote is Arabs against Jewish. You have in India a racist government now, which is oppressing the Muslims because it's the mob rule. You have more Hindus, and the Hindus are voting for Hindus, but not for Muslims. So you have all those distortions. It's very dangerous, and this is why sometimes you need to have a solid, at least a constitution, or maybe a king or a uniting force. So right now, why are we somehow kind of siding more for the military? It's because that is the only institution right now in Myanmar that can bring Myanmar together and avoid civil war and avoid balkanization. But keep in mind that, again, this democracy concept, it works under many, many preconditions. Preconditions are no money interference, no foreign interference, a certain level of maturity and education in people, and a protection of all the minorities within a country. So it requires a high level of maturity. So in trying to impose democracy upon certain countries, it's asking for civil war. And again, Myanmar, when during the last elections, was still under civil war. Unofficially, it's a very divided country. So asking and trying to force upon Myanmar a democracy at this stage was just ridiculous. Just ridiculous.
Absolutely. And it has to be said over and over and over again that democracy is a process of self-determination. So if there is any foreign interference, it is not a democracy. It is not the people of Myanmar determining anything about their future. Everything is being determined in Washington. And again, going back to Aung San Suu Kyi, those foreign advisors, they were practically running the country with just her as a figurehead. And the National League for Democracy, I've gone over how many of the prominent members there and now part of this fake national unity government, how each and every one of them had their own personal project that the US government was funding, that they were drawn from and put into that government under Aung San Suu Kyi and now under the national unity government. That's not democracy at all. And all of the examples that you picked, Angelo, these were all countries that were colonies or the product of Western imperialism. And that's the name of the game, divide and conquer. And elections is just one more way that they can help energize that process of divide and conquer. So democracy and elections, these are supposed to be ways of resolving and making decisions. And instead, it has just been a way to amplify these fault lines, these ethnic, racist, religious fault lines that are purposefully created and exploited for this divide and conquer. You have anything else to add, Angelo? I think we're... I
just want to add a few more informations about the trial of Aung San Suu Kyi. So there are some evidence of corruption. I mean, some serious corruption of the whole government of Aung San Suu Kyi. And I think the Western media is being a bit mute on this. we are the only one just exposing this corruption, the meddling, all of this. There are lots of things coming out, and the Western media are not protecting much Aung San Suu Kyi because they don't have much in their hands. There are lots of cases that are going against Aung San Suu Kyi, and so I think they're just going to dump her. I think
possibly. And one of the comments that I keep seeing over and over again by people who support this opposition in Myanmar, oh, so you're for the army shooting peaceful protesters in the head, and this is why we have to keep doing episodes like this. We have to show that even the opposition media is admitting that the opposition is attacking schools, threatening teachers and students, killing people, hunting people down and murdering them. This is why the military and the police are shooting back. I'm not for any military arbitrarily killing people in their country, obviously, but that's not what's happening in Myanmar. As I said, the government that was thrown out of power was a product of foreign intervention. The military's job is to preserve the nation's sovereignty. That's what they did by ousting Aung San Suu Kyi, arresting her foreign advisors, uprooting these foreign agencies and their interference in the country. And then when the opposition came out onto the streets, they did so violently, and the police and the military are duty bound to restore order. And if that requires the use of force, because force is being used against them, that's what happens. That's why you probably shouldn't go out into the streets and fight with the military or police unless you're prepared for that. And now even the opposition media is admitting that this is armed, they're calling it resistance. I would call it, this is another proxy war. I don't even know if it's accurate to call it a civil war, because a civil war is an internal thing. And this opposition wouldn't even exist without US, British, Western European, Australian support. They wouldn't even exist. And so I'm not sure. I understand why people say it's a civil war, because it's two sides inside of a country fighting each other. But that's what this is right now. These aren't peaceful protests being put down by a callous military dictatorship. This is armed conflict right now. And even the opposition admits that. So for people that want to keep posting that comment, just look at the opposition yourself and ask yourself, why are you supporting people who openly admit that they're bombing schools, shooting at schools? The military isn't admitting that they're killing innocent people for no reason. They're explaining why they have to use force. The opposition is saying they're attacking schools. So these people who are still supporting the opposition in Myanmar, ask yourself, why are you supporting people attacking schools, sending out death squads to kill opposition politicians? Why do they support that? And I think it's a kind of a depressing point to leave this. Next week, we might talk about Myanmar more if there's further developments, or we might find another topic. But the reason we keep touching on Myanmar is just as you said, Angelo. Nobody else is covering it. You did mention the global light.
Global Light from Myanmar.
Yeah, this is the government newspaper, right, Angelo?
Yes, it's government newspaper, and it's more balanced. We get some information that we don't get anywhere else. It's very violent, bombs. The level of aggression is extreme. And keep in mind, dead people, it's probably half and half. It's for one protester, there's one military or one policeman being killed. So it's both sides.
And what's interesting is if you do read that newspaper, the government's newspaper, and then you read Myanmar Now, which is an opposition newspaper funded by the US government, look at where they agree that the opposition is violent, that they're carrying out attacks on schools. The government said the opposition is attacking schools. The opposition media says the opposition is attacking schools. So there's certain things that are just undeniable at this point. So I think we've established that very well, but we have to keep repeating it because nobody else is picking up on this. Not yet. And we'll just have to keep an eye on this. So thank you very much again, Angelo, for joining me. We'll see you again next week. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and supporting us. I really appreciate it, and we will see you again next week. Bye for now.